You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. This week, my guest is New York Times and international best-selling author Madeline Martin. Madeline writes World War II historical fiction and historical romance novels, and she is the author of over 40 books. In 2021, her novel The Last Bookshop in London became an instant New York Times bestseller. And Madeline's latest work, The Keeper of Hidden Books, is a USA Today bestseller and had been on the bestseller list for 5 consecutive weeks as of the time we recorded the conversation that you are about to hear. Madeline is passionate about immersing herself in deep research to understand the times and places that she sets her stories in. And as you'll hear in our conversation, Madeline spent most of her childhood as part of an army family in Germany and says that frequent moves to new schools and her shy personality often made connecting with her peers a challenge. So Madeline's best friend in most places became the local librarians, who would introduce her to books where she could connect with different times, places, and characters. Fast forward years later, and after reading a novel over her maternity leave after her daughter was born, Madeline decided she'd like to write a book like that as well. She joined a local writers club and realized that she had a lot to learn. So from there, she spent years immersing herself in the craft of writing and has since become one of the most successful, prolific authors in her genre. In our conversation, we dove deep into Madeline's creative process and workflow. She detailed high-impact writing tactics like save the cat moments, and then storytelling, story pacing, and so much more that all of us can put to use to become stronger communicators. We also explored her research process, how to utilize feedback to drive improvement, and her quarterly goal-setting process that has propelled her efforts to publish more than 40 books over the past 15 years. Most importantly, whether you are a writer or not, this conversation is filled with lessons all of us can utilize to become more powerful storytellers and communicate ideas that break through the noise and stand the test of time. This conversation is jam-packed, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Madeline Martin. Where I want to begin, how did you get into writing, and specifically writing fiction? Do you remember a time as a child when you wrote your first story? Tell me about that.
Well, I would say that I've always loved reading, but apparently my mom and dad told me that they used to have to pay me a penny a page to actually read. I don't remember that, so it doesn't count. But I've always really loved books. And I didn't actually realize that I have written so much in my life until my mom sent me these big boxes that she'd been transporting back and forth to and from all of our moves to Germany, because my dad was in the army at the time. And so I went through all these boxes and I found all of these books that I had started. I had some that were like a chapter. I had one that was like this hardcover book that I had made like binding for, and I did like an author's note and everything in it. So, I think I've just always had stories in my head. So, yeah, I think I've been writing like seriously for about 15 years now.
Alan, what do you think drew you as a kid to books, even just as a reader?
I think a lot of it had to do with being an incredibly painfully shy child and having to move to a new school every 3 or 4 years. And I really was never that kid that would just walk up to a group of people and be like, hey, can I be your friend and sit with you? Now I'm more that way by, just sort of have forced myself to become that way. But when I was younger, I was not. And so usually my best friends were the librarians who could recommend amazing books that I could read. And I could just fall into these worlds and relate to these characters right away. And it really did help get me through all of the constant moving.
Was there a particular genre when you were a kid that you were drawn to?
I loved historical fiction even then. So Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie, that whole Laura Ingalls Wilder series was my favorite. And for those of you who do know Laura Ingalls Wilder and all of her books, I always wanted so bad to be Mary, who was the good daughter. And I was always unequivocally Laura, who was always accidentally getting into trouble and doing the wrong things.
Do you remember a moment where you'd be reading these books, reading these novels, and obviously you were creating stories and capturing stories as evidenced by the shipments that your mom has shared with you? Do you remember a point where you were reading something and you said, I would really like to do this, or I really like how that sentence was constructed, or I love how this just tells a story and I fall in love with a character? Like, do you remember moments like that you think could have propelled you further along on your journey as a writer?
No, honestly, I just remember always being in my head. I was that whimsical little girl that always was, had my nose in a book, or I was thinking about reading a book or what I had just read. At one point, my mom actually even got me, when we were living in Germany one time, we had a big backyard with a big garden, and she got me a calico print dress and a bonnet, just like Laura. And I would run around barefoot and pretend to be her. So, I mean, I really, really just completely lost myself in all of those books.
So, Madeline, then fast forward for me and tell me, like, when was the first time that you wrote something and you said, this might be something that people would buy and other people would read? Like, take me to that moment, and what was that like?
It's funny. I never actually thought about like what people would buy from that sort of perspective. But I did, I read Outlander when my first daughter was born, so on maternity leave with her. And I enjoyed it so much, I thought, oh, I'd love to write a story kind of like this. And so that's when I started writing Scottish historical romance. And after I had written that book, I thought, oh, it'd be kind of neat to see this get published. So that's when I joined a local writers group and I met another author, and she and I exchanged books for each other to kind of go through and critique. And that's when I realized I had no idea what I was doing. So I pretty much stopped everything. And I spent the next 5 years learning absolutely everything I possibly could about writing. I went to every conference. I listened to books on CD, so that'll tell you how old that was. I would read books about the craft of writing, everything I could get my hands on, until I finally felt ready to really write a book again to my best of my ability with that knowledge under me.
I have so many questions now, Madeline. So, the books on CD, did you read the books? Did you listen to the books on CD just because out of convenience and it was more time to consume literature? Or was there something about listening to another author's work that helped you improve your writing as an author?
I'm a mom, and so time is a very limited commodity. And really, it came down to just having time. I would drop the kids off at daycare, and on the way driving over to work, I would listen to those books on tape to just try to get as much packed in of that free time, quote unquote, free time as a mom that I had to really make an impact.
As a parent of young kids, I totally appreciate and understand that. I was telling a friend recently that I've been listening to a long form podcast, and it's a 4-hour episode, and it took me 3.5 weeks. And I did it, on the back and forth between carpools and drop offs and things of that nature. So I totally understand. Now, when you exchanged work with that other author in that writing club, was there, I mean, you said that you could see immediately that there was a massive gap between where you were and where you needed to get to, in your opinion, to become a published author and create a book that bookstores would sell and people would read. Do you remember specifically one or two things that stood out as areas that you really needed to develop?
I did sort of the classic thing that a lot of people do when they first start writing a novel, and they call it the sitting on a rock and thinking, where the person just is sitting there staring out a window or sitting in one location and thinking about all these things that have sort of made them into the person who they are, and all of the tribulations that they're facing, and really all of that. And it's just kind of like this massive like information dump that's not really compelling or exciting. And that definitely was, I think, the gravest sin that I committed right up front.
So, as an author, I mean, is one of the things that you're trying to create is movement? I mean, is constant, for lack of a better term, movement, where the story is moving, the authors are moving. Is that something that you're looking to do, and how do you do that?
Right. So that's something that's referred to as pacing. And with pacing, it's what really compels you to continue reading on. So if you've gotten to a book where you set it down and you don't pick it back up again, and you keep forgetting to pick it up because it's really not interesting to you anymore, it likely is a pacing issue, or it could even be a character issue. Because if you don't care about the character, you're not going to care about the story or what happens to that person.
What are some of the things that you can do as an author to make people care about characters?
Really, if you start them off the bat being a likable person, that's really beneficial. Either they're really funny, or they're really handsome, or they're really pretty, or they're a really good person. You can have somebody who's not especially a great person who can still appeal to readers. Like if anybody has seen the story of the Otto, what is the name of that one? The name of that book, the story called Otto, I think. But that one, the guy starts out, he's this horrible curmudgeon, right? But at the same time, like he ends up helping people. And so that's what makes him seem like a nice person. Or, oh gosh, now I don't remember the name of all these films. I didn't really think to have them set aside. But really, it's if you make them a redeemable person, you can't, for example, have somebody who kicks dogs and that person's never going to be redeemable. But if you have somebody who is in a sympathetic situation, who is a kind person, who does things to help other people, they call it the save the cat moment. So you can have like the biggest curmudgeon in the world, but if he's walking by and he sees a cat in a tree and he stops and he's grumbling and he picks the cat out of the tree and he sets him on the ground, now we like him because he stopped and he saved the cat. He can't be that bad.
He can't be that bad. So I'm curious, going back to the pacing, because this is something that I think anybody listening, regardless, of what they do, whether they make presentations on behalf of their company, whether they're selling something, whether they're a keynote speaker, whether they're simply just trying at a cocktail party or a dinner party to be more engaging, I truly believe that a lot of success and engagement comes down to becoming a better storyteller. Even if you're not an author publishing fiction, becoming a better storyteller is so important. So I want to double click into the pacing again, because what types of things can you do to make sure that the pace is right when you're telling a story? How does Madeline Martin know when it's time to end a chapter, when it's time to leave someone hanging, with a cliffhanger? How do you reconcile all that?
Leave people hanging every chance you get. If you can say, and then, or something along those lines, that's usually the best really way to do it. Try not to bog anybody down in details. All that granular stuff, see whatever it is that you can really filter out, because not all of it is going to be necessary. So really kind of condense it into really what the meat is and trim all that fat away. And that will really help for making pacing happen. Try to keep things exciting. If it's something that's exciting to you, likely it will be exciting to other people. So talking to people about the weather may not be super exciting. Talking to people about a new hurricane that might be coming into Florida might be more exciting, because it's something a little bit more than just your average banal sort of conversation.
What are your thoughts on like just words in general? I have this philosophy that sometimes we can overcomplicate language and overcomplicate sentences. How do you keep the sentence structure and the way you're communicating simple enough so that anybody can digest it, but also have enough texture to it that it's interesting and enjoyable?
That's a really great question. I think just it's however it is that people organically just talk. For me specifically, I thankfully don't have too highbrow of a vocabulary. I don't think that it's like completely going over anybody's head or anything like that. But, for me, it's just however you tend to communicate. And also, I think obviously it goes along with the people that you're communicating with as well. I mean, obviously, if I were going to be going up and giving a keynote, I would make sure I didn't say things like, and I would make sure that I had really outlined exactly what I was that I wanted to say, make sure that it was very succinct, and that I had the proper verbiage to really support what it was that I was trying to convey. But, so I really think a lot of it has to do with the setting as well.
Ellen, let's zoom out a little bit. I really want to dig into your creative process, even in a more broader context. So we're sitting here, I'm looking at you, and right over your shoulder, you have this big dry erase board with colorful Post-it notes. It's on a grid. I'm trying to paint a picture here for people listening. I've got to believe that's got something to do with your creative process. Take me through your creative process. Where do you get ideas? How do you capture and organize ideas? And then once you decide to work on a project, how do you do it?
Well, so first of all, I'll address the board. The board is actually not necessarily my process for writing, but it's just really maintaining my goals. So those are my quarterly goals. And the top section is what I want to have done this quarter. The middle section is what I'm in the process of doing. And the bottom section is what I've completed. And my running joke is that the bottom is never as full as I would like it to be at the end of the quarter. But as far as my creative process goes, really it's sort of the spark of that initial idea. I'm a huge history nerd. I'm a huge research nerd. So I really like to sort of just delve into different articles. And when I read a lot of those articles, certain ideas might catch my attention. So when I was with The Keeper of Hidden Books, for example, what really caught my attention was how cohesive really the Polish underground resistance was during World War II, really the most in all of Nazi occupied Europe. And so that kind of got me thinking, oh, well, I would like to write a book about Poland during World War II. I usually do about 10 months of research. With this particular book, while I was writing the book, I was actually halfway done, and I found these incredible journals from Warsaw's public librarians where they were talking about what they were doing to really save books from Nazi destruction and opening secret libraries when the libraries were closed. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. So I really I threw out half of the entire book that I had written and I completely started over from scratch. And it was absolutely worth it. I'm very, very happy with how the end product ended up coming. But with this particular book, it was 10 months of research. I used over 100 nonfiction books. I went to Warsaw for 2 weeks and I had over 15 spiral bound notebooks that were filled with handwritten notes. And it's funny because I had another interviewer had asked me how much of those notes I actually put into the book. And I think it really was only probably about 30%. But that other 70% really is what made the entire book come to life for me. It's what really brought to life that time period.
So, in other words, that's information that's essentially kind of coalescing in your mind that's maybe influencing how you're kind of rounding out the story,
Absolutely, yes.
even though it's not a piece of information that's directly appearing in the final product of the novel.
Right, exactly. And some of that is even just sort of getting an idea of what sort of character to make, because you really want to make a character that's going to be endemic to that particular time period, that particular location. One of the examples that I like to give in that regard is with one of my books called The Last Bookshop in London. At one point, Buckingham Palace gets bombed, which is not a spoiler, it's just history. But, in America, if the White House got bombed, we would be up in arms. We want to go kick butt, right? Well, when Buckingham Palace got bombed, the Queen said, well, now I can look the East End in the face, because the East End were the people who got hit the worst with the bombs in the beginning with the Blitz. And the people said, look at the King and Queen. They're being bombed just like us. So the whole point of the Blitz really was to demoralize people in England. And it ultimately did exactly the opposite of that. It really brought them together. And so that's what I'm talking about, really researching and getting a feel for the community and really just the people overall. How are they going to respond to this? And it's going to be different for every country and even different time periods in that country.
So for the Keeper of Hidden Books, you said 10 months of research. I think you said 18 spiral notebooks. I think I had that.
I was like over 15, yeah.
Over 15 spiral notebooks. You read a lot of nonfiction. I'm curious, when it comes to historical fiction, how do you balance what has to kind of be like true versus what can be fictional? Like how does that work? That's always been a question of mine, because I enjoy historical fiction, because for me, and probably the same way for you when you were a kid and even today, I find that it transports me to a different place, a different time, and really just enables my mind to quiet down, relieve stress, and it brings a lot of enjoyment. So I'm always curious to talk to an author of historical fiction. Like, how do you decide how much has to be true, how much can be fictional? Talk to me about that for a moment.
So that really is going to be dependent on the author. It really is just a personal preference. For me in particular, because I am such a history nerd, I really like to be as absolutely historically accurate as possible. So there are some authors who might change the course of history because it needs to accommodate some part of their plot. Mine is exactly the opposite. I will always have the actual historical facts come before any sort of character plot or anything in between. And so for me, incorporating a lot of that history is very important. I personally do incorporate some real people, but never any of the primary protagonists, any of the main characters, because I kind of just, it's intimidating to put my own thoughts into somebody else's head who was really in existence. And, with characters, you generally have to have some sort of a flaw that they need to overcome. Like, who am I to give somebody that really existed a flaw that they have to overcome? So for me personally, that's not really just something that's up my particular alley. So everything really that's happening is pretty much fact. And the primary characters are going to be fiction. That's usually about how it is with my books.
That makes sense. I understand that now. So thank you for helping to clarify. Madeline, where I'm curious is, we talked a little bit about your research process and how you get started. Once you get started, how do you take all the research and start getting it into the form of a book? So are you one of these authors that create a 250-page outline, or are you someone who just writes and then kind of structures it all together? How does that work for Madeline Martin?
So I definitely put together a very comprehensive outline. I usually try to make sure that it's almost on a chapter by chapter really designed so that I can follow it easily. I have a really bad habit of over researching. And I say over researching because I get to the point where I realize, oh my God, this book is due in 2 months. I have to get this book written yesterday. So I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to just start writing. And in that case, it's really lovely having such an incredibly detailed outline to follow because it saves me from myself.
From yourself. So that lends me kind of back, that takes me back to your comment a few minutes ago about your goals and the whiteboard there with the goals for the quarter. Do you set goals based upon input or output or a combination of the two? In other words, are you saying to yourself, I need to write 10 pages a day? I need to finish this book by this date? I mean, how do you organize goals?
Yes. So I definitely do it more on a daily basis. I think that even for somebody like me who has written over 40 books, to just make the claim, I'm going to write a book this year, still is a very daunting task. I feel like anytime you can break up a massively daunting task into bite-sized pieces, it makes it not only manageable, but also a more of a guarantee for success at the end of that.
Absolutely. For an author as prolific as you have been, I mean, it's just remarkable the consistency in which you've been able to develop your craft and create. I mean, it's truly remarkable. So I'm curious, over the course of your career so far, and you're still, I mean, you've got a book that just came out and you've got the Book Lovers Library already scheduled to hit bookstores in September 2024. So it's this constant wheel that is spinning for you. You're so prolific. Now that you're 40 plus books into the journey, are there things that you can look back on and say, I've really improved in this area, or I still need to improve in it? Talk to me about that. Like your overall trajectory. Like, where have you grown as a writer? Where do you feel like you still have room to grow as a writer?
Well, as far as growth goes, I think that just in general, I think that I've probably just become a better author just by the act of continually doing it. I also make it a point every single year to make sure that I do one major educational endeavor. So it might be working with a book coach. It might be doing some sort of like an immersive sort of a retreat kind of thing. I usually do writing retreats and I usually go to conferences. And when I go to the conferences, I go and I take as many of the classes as I can. So I feel like there is always, always, always going to be room for improvement. And so I hope that every single book that I write will be better than the last one that came out because I always want to be better.
I'm smiling from ear to ear, Madeline, because it just speaks to how humble and what, an intense desire you have to grow and develop as an author, even with all of the success that you've had. Here you are, hanging up international bestsellers. You're on the USA Today bestseller list for 5 consecutive weeks, and you're still thinking about, how can I dedicate some time to develop my craft. It's so awesome. Sticking with that thought of being humble and constantly learning, talk to me about like the process of collecting feedback, making adjustments. How do you balance like taking enough feedback, but also like just trying to be true to yourself and what you're trying to say in the work? Talking about feedback.
So I know a lot of people will say that they don't want to ever read any of their reviews. And I think they're honestly doing themselves a great disservice. It can be difficult sometimes because I feel like there are some people out there whose goal really is just to be very unkind and just throw out invectives in the hopes that they can really troll for a lot of likes. But as far as the Goodreads reviews, Goodreads, I mean, Amazon, whichever reviews they happen to be, I think it's so incredibly important to read through those because they really will give you an idea of where that book hit and where it missed with readers. So, for example, and again, I think almost the 4 stars and the 5 stars are some of the best places to find that information because those are generally going to be the people who said, I really loved this book. And they might have a little, but I really didn't like, et cetera, et cetera. And so those are the ones that you really learn from. Maybe it's something where they felt that the story dragged a little bit. And if you have 50 people out of 100 who said the story dragged, that's something to listen to. So how can you make the next story not drag? And so it really is a wonderful way to not only identify your weaknesses, but also to identify your strengths. Because I think that something that does help us be better is knowing what we are good at so that we don't overcorrect in some of those areas, but that we can also kind of know that, okay, this is where I'm strong. If I have a weakness in this area, this is what I can rely a little heavier on.
That's important. I mean, like you said there, looking at the 4 and 5 star reviews, because those are going to tell you the people, like you said, that really connected with the work, but they may have a suggestion and you may be able to uncover themes and patterns that you can use in the future. Before the book is published, how do you go about getting feedback? Of course, there's an editor and an editing process, but do you share it with other authors? Do you share it with friends? How do you do that?
Yes, I have 2 friends who read my books. I have one that reads it as I write it, which is wonderful for me because it really gives me a lovely sense of confidence while I'm writing. If I'm off the track, she tells me and I can kind of rein it back in. I have another friend who reads it after I'm done with it. And then before it finally does go to print, my mom is the last person who always reads it.
And what type of feedback do you get from your mom?
She usually points out all of the, if she finds any typos or grammatical issues. I don't know why she wasn't an English teacher. She would have been amazing at it, but she has a little pen and she gets her iPad and she sits there and she makes all the notes like, oh, this doesn't really make sense, or you should reword this sentence. Oh, this comma doesn't go here. Little things like that.
Our parents can always find a way to keep us humble
Yes,
and
definitely.
find the missing comma or find the run-on sentence. There is no question that our parents have a way of helping us with that and staying humble. I'm curious, Madeline, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, when you think about, and you're still in the heart of your career here, you're so prolific, like I said earlier, in terms of the output and the quantity of books that you write and the regularity with which you write. If you fast forward decades from now, all of your books represent your legacy. What do you want the legacy to be? What do you want people to think about Madeline Martin?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I would like for people to look back and remember how my books made them feel. And I hope that I was able to bring history to life for them and hopefully be able to shed light on maybe some heroes that people would have forgotten about otherwise.
I'm curious also, when you think about all of your success and maybe failures too along the way, what has been, if you had to distill it down to one thing, all of the success that you've had and how you've navigated those failures, like what would you say like that one success factor has been, the biggest success factor?
I think that would be learning how to take directives, to know that I'm not perfect, that things can always improve, and to be able to take a step back and objectively look at my writing and say, you know what, you're right, that does need to be changed. Or having the confidence to be like, actually, no, that really is supposed to be how it is. I really feel like having that confidence and that ability to step back and look at my work is what's been the most helpful.
How have you built that confidence to be able to step back and and recognize where there's opportunities for growth.
I'm a perfectionist. I always want it to be perfect. Always, always. Even if that means that somebody has to tell me something that might hurt a little bit. I always say I would rather hear it from a friend than not get that book sale, to get that bad review, or whatever the case may be. It's better to hear it from somebody that you love and that you trust than to not have the success that you're hoping to have and then wondering why.
Madeline, I have had so much fun. I have learned so much from you. I can't wait to just see what you continue to create on this journey that you're on. It's a wonderful journey. So much success. I wish you continued success in the future. And we'll have to check in again another time and just see how your career continues to progress. But Madeline Martin, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me this week. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's been so wonderful. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tart pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.